So I think, and I mean, first off, here I am on the west coast of Europe, right, in Ireland, the only kind of English-speaking nation other than Britain. But Great Britain is now out of Europe politically and economically. So we're kind of like the go-to place for US with regard to a lot of different things. So it's interesting, even though we're not physically connected as a landmass and there's the Atlantic Ocean between us, there's still that going on here as well since the pandemic. So here we are, we're physically out of it. And our Prime Minister here announced this back in late January. He said, look, we have the pandemic under control. So go out and play, everybody, do whatever you want to do. But yet here we are a few months later and people are not still kind of getting back to so-called normal ways. And okay, you might say they have moved on individually in their lives or they're doing other things. And that might be the case. But there's definitely that kind of, sort of sense of, well, we're kind of in a transitional period. What's the next chapter? We don't know. But certainly people are not socializing as much. They're not habitually kind of having the same routines or even as energized routine as before the pandemic. They're looking at things differently, obviously, as well. But I do think that, for example, what you have going on is there's this kind of, if we look at, and, I mentioned, I spoke to you before about this, Rubio, with regard to Shawshank Redemption being one of my favorite movies, right? That was in the late 90s. But basically, if we think of the Shawshank movie or any movie that has prisoners, right? And we're watching that, great movie, Escape to Alcatraz, these kind of things, right? And we're in the movie, we're in the theater hall, we're having the popcorn, whatever else, we're really in it, the sound is blaring, we're feeling as if we're in prison with our favorite character and so on. When they get released, invariably the prisoner who's released after 10 years or 20 years or escapes or whatever else, what happens? Mentally, they're not released. So physically, they're already open, but mentally they're not released. And if you look at the great, not to spoiler alert, but, with Shawshank Redemption, you had the same guy, I think it was Morgan Freeman, who was acting as a character called Red at the time, and he was released into the same physical apartment that was, given to ex-cons at the time. And there was a mark, wasn't there, up on the ceiling where previous prisoners had been released and etched their names and initials that they were there. So they all went through the same thing with regard to trying to get back into normal physical life and routines, but they were institutionalized. So the question now is, and I don't have all the answers with regard to this, but we're all living through it, 7.5 billion people. Are we all doing the same thing, or are we kind of doing different things? But certainly, like you say, stubborn opinions. People are kind of stuck, I think, mentally back to 2020, March or so, 2020, or whenever your particular country closed down or locked down or got frightened with it all. So people are stuck. That was a huge shock to individuals. And again, going back to your earlier question, everybody's different, aren't they? Some are analytical, some people are kind of more dreamy, and everyone's different in different ways. So there's going to be a huge sector of society that are going to be stubborn, going to be just, mentally still exhausted or feeling as if they're not fully safe. And that last piece, I think, really underlies everything, because our feelings of safety, that is one of the main things our brain that's wired for is safety. Think back to prehistoric times. Think to hunter-gatherers. You've got men leaving the caves, whereas the females stayed in. So why? They've got to go out and they've got to forage for food. They see danger, they hear, the weather changes or whatever else, they wait. Safety. Okay, so it's a survival instinct we have. So I think people are still in survival mode, and if you mix that up with personality traits and so on, you've got that stubbornness perhaps.